Okay, welcome everyone to the show today. I'm Landon Sikahema, and joining us here today is a guest, my relative, Sam Lutui. So, Sam, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. So, again, Sammy's like my older uncle, but we're going to talk about his background and some of his life story today and the amazing things that he's doing now and the interesting kind of winding path that he's taken to get to where he is now. But yeah, let's start. So Sam, right now you run your own therapy practice, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, nice. So Sam, he owns and runs his own therapy practice, but he actually doesn't have any kind of official educational degrees in psychology or social work or counseling psychology or anything like that to do with therapy. Am I right about that?
Yeah. I actually, my background was in performance arts. I've studied theater in college. That's where my background's at. It's in performing.
Oh, that's
And
really amazing. So you finished your bachelor's degree, but officially is your bachelor's degree in performing arts or is it theater or what do they call it?
theater arts is what I
Okay.
studied.
Nice. So that's really cool. And it's really cool that, we have a fellow Tongan, a fellow Polynesian that, got your bachelor's degree in something like that. Tell us a little bit about, your bachelor's degree in theater arts and, your interest in, the arts like that.
Well, arts has always been great interest of mine, and that's what I studied in college. That was my interest in college. It was in performance arts, music, theater. That's always just been a great interest and some I've dabbled in, and had a passion for it throughout my whole life, basically. Even as a young kid in Tonga, watching and listening to musicals and such. So it's theater has been uh, a part of that interest, part of that passion, and I eventually made it in my studies in college, and that's how I ended up at Southern Utah University.
Nice. How old were you when you guys left Tonga, Sam?
We left Tonga. I turned 12 here in the United States. So I was 11 when
Okay.
we left. And
Okay. So you were, yeah, that's a little older. So you were born and raised in Tonga until you were 11 and some change when you guys moved over to the States, correct?
yes.
Okay. Um, can you tell us when you talked about even growing up in Tonga until you were 11 years old? Tell us about the theater scene there. What's it called? Is there kind of what was the theater scene when you say you grew up watching stuff in Tonga? Like what did you grow up watching?
Well, Tongans and even in Tonga, they're very, very musical and they're very theatrical. And watching the church I grew up in, we done plays. Uh, ever since I was a kid, I was a baby. My first acting job was being baby Jesus,
Over in Tonga?
in Tonga for my church,
Nice.
the church I was attending at the time. And I'm grateful for those trainings because every year they had what they call a whakame, uh, which is they, tell Bible stories and act them out in the church. And it's a big event in a Wesleyan church, a Methodist church, which I grew up in. And so we grew up, in that, um, knowing about doing plays and acting and even watching the local schools do Sound of Music. At that time, they had one of the schools in Tonga was doing the Sound of Music, and they had little tours around the island, and I would, go and follow them and watch how they portray the Sound of Music in Tonga, and that was very, very inspiring, and I love that. And even listening to just plays on the radio, they would, do story time and stuff that they did on the radio. I was fascinated by it, the storytelling. So the storytelling aspect of performing was a great interest of mine.
That's really amazing. So was it when you gave the example of the school that you would go watch and they tour around the islands, when you were a kid and growing up in Tonga doing Sound of Music, was it a high school, I'm assuming?
Yes,
Okay.
one of the high school.
Okay. And then with the story time that you would hear on the radio, what kind of stories would you hear on the radio in Tonga? Like what kind of storytelling are they doing on the radio in Tonga when you were growing up?
They would have like some of the legends, the old, Tongan mythology, Tongan legends. They would tell those stories, and they'd have a story time, and I would listen to the stories and just imagine what that would be like. And that's one thing I actually appreciated about the radio uh, format is that my imagination ran wild on, as creating those images and in my mind, and so that was very, very fascinating at an early age.
That is really cool. So, um, like you said, it's not visual, so your imagination was just able to go completely wild. With that said, when you say, on the radio, when you were growing up in Tonga, they would, tell the stories of a lot of the Tongan mythology and myths and legends. Was it usually just one narrator kind of telling the whole story, or would there be multiple people coming in as voices for the different, characters and stuff, or?
It would be mostly one narrator that would tell the story, and there were times where I've heard the multiple speakers or voices, but most of the time they would have these story times that they would do called fananga on the radio, and
Okay.
that was only. I mean, there were no televisions, and so radio was our only way of getting entertainment to the masses.
No, that's really interesting. So most of the time it was one narrator telling these Tongan mythology stories and myths and legends, but some of the time they would have multiple people, coming in with their voices as the different characters of these Tongan, mythological myths and legends. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes.
That's really, really cool. If you don't mind me asking, what year were you born, Sam?
1972.
1972. Okay, okay. So you're about 13 years older than me. So you
Yes.
came to the States at about 1983 or so, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, and so you're growing up in the 70s and early 80s in Tonga. This was the reality. I mean, it was almost like the U.S. in like the 30s and 20s, where everyone's kind of huddled around the radio listening to these stories and stuff.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, exactly.
It's really cool. It's way cool, man. Are there any other examples you can give me of growing up in Tonga where there were plays acted out or theater or besides Sound of Music? Was there ever any kind of like visual plays in Tonga where they'd act out any like Tongan specific stories, like say the myths and legends of the Tongan mythology, or not necessarily, or?
Yeah, most of every in Tonga, everybody the religious influence is very strong. So everything that you do on a weekly, regular basis, it's involving the church that you belong to. So a lot of the stuff that we did that I grew up with were done within the church. And so a lot of the plays and stuff that we have seen most of them were Bible stories. And then occasionally you see stuff, about Tongan legends and stuff like that that was done, mainly like a school project or, a community event that would display those, mainly in their dances and, stuff like that.
That's really cool. So, and again, I've really only been to Tonga, twice technically. Once when I was a baby, but I really just once that I count. It was after my mission, and so I remember we were in someone's home, and this was 2007, and I don't know if it was like a traveling like troupe or something, but they were acting out certain short little skits and stuff, and there were guys, sitting on the floor, like playing guitars, and, doing, singing little songs that went along with the skits they were doing. And it was all in Tongan, and I'm not fluent. And so I didn't understand it. But it was very, very amazing. It was very, very cultural specific and Tonga specific. It really was like this very nuanced Tongan art form, these little skits that this troupe was kind of performing for us. And they were largely comedies. And so everyone that was with us, they were laughing hard because they could speak and understand the language. And again, me and my siblings couldn't. But it was really a cool cultural and artsy experience for me and my siblings to witness this, because it was very, very like Tongan specific. It wasn't like they were, in this case, they weren't acting out Bible stories or anything that we would easily recognize in a Western framework. It wasn't Bible stories. It wasn't, whether, The Sound of Music or Beauty and the Beast or something. And it was really cool for me because they were acting out these little skits. And again, my dad would kind of like try to translate, for us as fast as he could as they were acting out the skits and stuff. But, obviously it was tough for him to like, talk as fast as they were talking, as they were talking, to give us all the meanings right away. But it was really cool because, again, like, they would have some dialogue with the characters, and then after that, like the guys that were sitting in front of us, on the floor, they would play the guitar and sing these Tongan songs, while there was like dancing and stuff going on. It was like a sing-along musical skit, but they were mostly comedic. But it was a really cool cultural experience, like nothing I've ever experienced before or since, even going to like Tongan wards here and there here in the States. And so it was just a really cool experience for me. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, like you said, most of the time when you would see plays in person, so you would see it visually growing up in Tonga, like at churches, it was more often than not Bible stories being acted out. But some of the time, like you say, they were actually doing little plays acting out like Tongan myths and legends. That was accompanied, and it included, musical things like Tongan songs and stuff like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very accurate. And here in the States, most non-Tongans look at Tongans as, being naturally athletic, right? In my opinion and in my observation, we are more natural on the stage than we are on the sports arena. As natural as we are, I think we're natural performers. And so I've watched people perform all the time. Even you go sit down with any group of Tongans, just Polynesians in general, and there's a group somewhere, you will be entertained from laughter to an emotional conversation to a serious conversation, all the way up to even violent interactions with you see all the emotions all in certain settings, and you can see people perform. There's always someone performing, whether it's my neighbor or my dad and his friends. I would sit there and watch my dad and his friends and just, laugh for 2 hours straight because someone was performing. And my dad was, a clown in that sense of knowing how to get a laugh and how to perform in such a way that, draw your attention and, keep people's attention on him. So, our people are very natural in that sense. So. Yeah,
that's really cool. And for all of you, there's so many things on Sam's resume, it'd be tough for me to list them all, but he also played football in college, and he was a college football coach. His first coaching job was with Kalani Sitake. It was Kalani Sitake's first coaching job, so they started coaching together. But I love hearing that. It's a really interesting, nuanced, bold perspective you have, Sam, where you say that as athletically talented as we are, and again, firsthand, especially from your coaching, career, but, and again, everyone talks about at this point in time, a lot of Polynesians have gone through the NFL and made a big noise, but you actually think that we're more naturally talented on the stage in the performing arts than we are, on the gridiron and other sports, huh?
Yeah, I think so. I truly believe that. We are, and that's why I like to encourage um, a lot of our people, Tongans and even Polynesians, just Polynesians in general. Um, we're more uh, natural into performing. We grew up performing all the time. We have performance in our blood and in our interactions a lot more than we had any athletic interactions, that's more natural to, every family gathering was our uncles was like, all right, there, you get up here, talent show. you know, you know, do some kind of a talent. And I find myself when I get together with my siblings and we're getting all of our kids to get up and start performing stuff. And I remember back, and that's what I saw growing up, is watching each other perform and having our parents and uncles and aunties make us perform. I don't remember a time not performing, but I remember a time not playing sports, you know.
That is
So
a really cool and again a really nuanced perspective where you can't even remember, far back enough to where you weren't performing, but you do remember, not playing sports. It's really cool, and it's really cool. And again, you're about 13 years older than me. When did you graduate from high school? Like class of 91?
90.
90. Okay. And I just think it's amazing that, as far back as that was, you went to college and you graduated with your bachelor's in theater arts. It was bold for you to major in that, all the way back then. I think, a lot of our Polynesians were still pretty new in the States, and a lot of people, most parents are probably telling their kids to major in something more practical and lucrative like accounting or engineering but as early as you graduated from high school in 90 and early 90s, you're in college and you graduated in theater arts. I just think that's so amazing and bold, and it's innovative of you. That it's really awesome.
Well, it's but there's depth to theater, right? It's not just so my emphasis was in directing and writing. And in order to be a theater major, some of the works that you have to complete in theater, and this is one of the things that draw me to theater, is that you had to learn how to deal with audio, right? Sound and audio. You had to deal with lighting. That means you have to learn how to design lights, design sound, lighting on stage. They have to learn how to design costume. I can design costume. I can create clothes. You have to learn how to design a stage. So I can do blueprint to build a house, basically. Uh, you know, and there's so many aspects into theater that you had to learn all these things. So basically, I was learning about 10, 12 different professions all in one, from sound to lighting to costume to makeup to fashion. Construction, all of those things, and including acting, and the directing and the lucrative part of performing, which is being in front of the stage. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that attracted me, specifically with the writing.
Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing all of that, your bachelor's in theater arts was well-rounded. You were a part of the set design as well as the acting and the directing and costume design. I love that. It's really awesome. Again, I don't know if you can remember anything else before we move on about in terms of you growing up in Tonga, and every now and then I know you say that you would see plays, in the churches that were about like the Tongan mythology and Tongan legends. To go back to, my own experience when I was in Tonga after my mission in 2007. this little, like, I guess, performing troupe that was kind of performing for us and all of our relatives we were hanging out with in this house. It really was such a culturally nuanced and culturally specific, um, bunch of little skits that these guys are performing, because it really is like nothing I've ever experienced before. And I grew up in Jersey, so I've been to Broadway and stuff. And for no one that's ever been to Tonga, my guess is it's something that they've never experienced before, because these little skits they were performing, they were like little, skits that were, comedic, but they also had like these original Tongan songs and Tongan melodies that these guys were playing on the guitar while, these guys were dancing in the midst of the skits. And then after the songs were done, they'd go back to acting out the skits. But the humor was very Tongan specific. It was a very Tongan brand of humor. And again, my dad would try to explain a lot to us, and he would try to translate and explain to us, and it was funny. But I know it would have been a lot funnier if we were all fluent in Tongan like my dad was. But I remember this one skit. One guy was acting. He was acting as like this this buzz saw or whatever, and then they would take a bunch of the little kids, and each little kid was like a piece of wood, and they would like they take him, they're like room room, and like take him across the buzz saw, which was this guy, and then they would throw him up to these other guys after he got split in half, and these people would catch him in the back of the buzz saw, and it was such a unique thing, and the actual plot was very relatively simplistic. It's like they're taking all these blocks of wood and taking them across this buzz saw, and again, each block of wood was like one of the little kids, and the buzz saw was this grown man standing there pretending like he's an electric saw. But like every time they would throw one of the little kids across, there would be some kind of like commentary, and then people would come in and start commenting on, oh, that's an ugly looking buzz saw. Like, what's wrong with this buzz saw? He's got a lot of bumps, and the audience would crack up laughing. And so again, I know I'm butchering it right now for my audience, and for any Tongans who are listening to this, I'm sure I'm butchering it, but it was just such a cool experience, because again, like these little skits, the plot was simplistic, but the humor I could tell was quite complex and sophisticated and very specific to Tongan humor. And I mean, I remember it was just such a cool experience to watch. And I remember, they would take these little kids and, like throw them across, this little space, like they were supposed to be going, through this buzzsaw, and like one of the little kids, his shorts kind of came down, far, and we saw his butt crack, and everyone started laughing at that. All the attention started going to that. And anyway, it was just cool to see this very Tongan specific humor. And it really was a really cool cultural experience that, again, I've never seen it outside of, this little trip we went to Tonga. Anytime I went to a Tongan church here in the States, I've never seen anything like it. And so it was really cool to see this very, very Tongan specific humor that is, again, so specific and so nuanced. And I know that, again, we were laughing because even as my dad was translating, it was funny, and everyone else around us was laughing. But anyway, that's my pathetic attempt to, explain what this little Tongan troupe was, when we were in Tonga performing these little skits. But anyway, do you remember are there any other nuances you can remember about these plays being performed about the Tongan myths and legends in Tonga, or not really?
No, but what you just described is a normal setting that you would see on, no matter where you go. There's always a group of people that are telling you some kind of, telling stories. We were, we're known as, the Polynesian people were known as the best navigators there were in history. Along with that, I think we're the best storytellers, because of our ability to tell a story, is you can get all the emotions from it. You can get humor, you can get, very inspiring, touching, and we hit all the emotions uh, of that's needed in a performance. And I think that's one of the things that's effective uh, white Polynesian athletes. Specifically, I'm going to talk about football because that's an arena that I know a little bit about. A lot of the Tongans and Samoan football players, they're very effective on the field with a warrior-like mentality. And then off the field, they'll be sitting around the locker room or a tree somewhere behind a stadium with their guitars and ukulele singing love songs, you know. So they go from one emotion of destroying each other, of, with that warrior mentality, to that of the sentiment of being to singing love songs, and they're able to tap into those emotions and turn it on and off and use it separately, of where and a lot of people that get into that rage to be effective on the gridiron, and when they come off of it they have no idea how to just function normal and without the rage. Takes them a while uh to calm down from that, of where it's a lot easier transition for us to move from you know uh that warrior into that lover mentality.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Um, yeah, again, just to, I'll leave that alone. Yeah, I'm kind of like, you know, beating the dead horse there, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and it really is cool for anyone. I would love if anyone was interested, like this very unique, these very unique Tongan skits that were being performed for us in Tonga. It really was literally a one of a kind experience. I've never seen anything before or like it. And again, it was funny. Again, we're like, each person was like a prop. And again, this one guy was supposed to be the buzzsaw, and then eventually the skit goes into everyone's examining the buzzsaw. It's like, oh, this buzzsaw, it's kind of ugly, it's kind of rusty, it's kind of crusty, kind of needs to be sharpened. And they're examining his face and making fun of him, and everyone's just laughing. It really was one of a kind, and it was just a very cool, funny thing. And again, like you say, there's a lot about our culture that is so uniquely catered to performing. It's this little skit performance that we experienced in Tonga. It really was like this very unique and nuanced thing that was very Tongan and cultural, Tongan cultural specific in every way, between the humor, the music, just the nature of the dialogue. It was just a very, very specific thing. And it's something that I think would be cool if they ever had a chance to perform for other people sometime. Like, I don't know, there's really cool Japanese art forms, like, say, kabuki and bunraku, if anyone's ever heard of that. Those are all cool things that are very cultural specific. And it's a cool opportunity for anyone to witness some of these, very cultural specific things, if you ever get a chance. But anyway, so you get your bachelor's degree, you graduate with your bachelor's degree in theater arts, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point you have a bachelor's degree. You didn't have any thought at that point about going into counseling therapy, did you?
No, mental health was not a part in the plans. My uh, goal was to pursue writing and directing. That was my goal. That was my intent. And, that was what I went to school for. That was what my interest was and my passion. And I actually had um, to make a decision. Um, I was a musician as well. So while I was going to college, I I was doing music on the side. I had a band, a full-on band, and I was, performing solo for a while before I got in a band. And I was offered my very first contract as a as an actor, and I had to make a choice because exactly one day after I had signed a tour with my band, um, I was offered this part.
You were offered
I got
what?
I got offered my first professional acting job.
Oh,
And, theater. It was a theater acting job, and so it was exciting, and it was a hard night for me to try to do what's right. And I had other band members that I felt like I was obligated to them, that we had already made this commitment. And so I turned down my first offer, and then went on tour with my band. So that was immediately right after college.
okay. So right after college, you're offered an acting job, and you decide to turn it down because you wanted to continue performing with your musical band that you were in. Correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't have turned it down if I didn't. I had just the day before. This is the day before. We had already signed and committed to uh, our tour, and so and it was a college tour. So these were all colleges and stuff. And we had one of the persons that helped us get that tour. She was a dear friend of mine, and she went out of the way to make it happen for us. And she's now the president of Southern Utah University, Mindy Benson. So shout out to her. So yeah, that kind of made things interesting, right there.
That is really interesting. So, if you don't mind, and again, I think if you're willing to, it's no pressure, but I know it's a tender story, but that you've told me before. But you graduate with your bachelor's in theater arts. It sounds like right out of college, you're still performing with a musical band because you're also a musician. But tell us what changed your trajectory, and I don't know how much, if it was years after you graduated with your bachelor's or if it was relatively soon after you finished your bachelor's. But what was it that you know changed your trajectory to all of a sudden want to go from entertainment, quite frankly, to being in the mental health industry?
Well, um, a general answer is when I was in college, I mentioned earlier, I was doing music on the side. I was working as a musician, a solo musician, as well as with a band while I was going to college. Also, I had another job, and I was working for youth corrections with the youth, and I had worked with troubled youth at that point. And so those two dynamics has been with me since my adult life, um, or ever since I went to college. I would always be performing, but I always found something that I was doing, whether it's volunteering or an actual employment that deals with troubled youth. And so those two, and even to this day, those two dynamics still go hand in hand in my um, journey in mental health. And so as I was doing those things, I would find things that would help uh, as far as I was working with a troubled youth. I would notice certain things of what I was doing with my performance, with my music, that would help them. And because I had school all day, and then I would have football during the evening, and then I would have a gig somewhere at night. I would get home really late. And so a lot of times I would have these part-time jobs as a night watch over at corrections, of where I go there, when during their bedtime, and I work at night all the way till when school starts. So a lot of time when the kids get rowdy at night, during their, right around their bedtime, um, I found that a lot of times staff would have a hard time bringing them down. And so what I would do is use my music, is my guitar, and I was very effective in using that to helping the youth. So there was an evolution there of my journey in mental health that started with things like that, and and then slowly over time, I compiled things that help and even help myself in my own journey. Uh, that full on propel me into the space that I'm in.
Oh, that's really amazing. Oh, that's really cool. So yeah, like you said, you've kind of been interdisciplinary in a lot of ways, where you've used your music to help with, helping kids with mental health and stuff like that. And it's really awesome. Um, do you want to tell the story about? Um, I don't know if you want to tell the story. Do you want to tell the story about what led you to really want to get into mental health even after college?
Sure. So the story, and I share this story, as I talk about my journey into this mental health space. But it started on my senior year in high school. Um, it was right around spring break, of which the story started. And a week before this happened, I had just signed a football scholarship to go play college football at Rick's College. I grew up poor, didn't have much, and so I um, didn't think I was ever gonna go to college. And this opportunity came, and I took it. And and then so I had signed a football scholarship. I was stoked as a normal 17-year-old that I get to go to college. I was excited, and my family was traveling to on spring break to California for a family event. And on our way back, which is Sunday night, March 26th, we're trying to get get home for school and for dad to get to work. And my dad was driving. We were on a minivan, and it was late at night, around 3 o'clock in the morning or so. And he was tired, and he asked me, as the oldest in the car, to drive. And as I was driving, uh, I found myself weary, and I eventually fell asleep and on the wheel while I was driving, and it rolled the minivan we were in. My parents, my brother, one brother and one sister were thrown out, and my sister died immediately, and then my parents and my brother were in a coma. So that's the background to this story. And then I had to figure out a way to survive, and then that's why I do what I do now. Was those things kind of eventually merge into one another, and they're kind of intertwined into to the healing process, and figure out some things and put some things together. And I created a few things, and that's what I'm teaching. So I'm actually teaching things um, that I went through myself. So I'm my very first patient in my mental health journey or process.
It's really awesome. And again, it's a really tender story. I appreciate you sharing it. I didn't realize you were a senior in high school when that occurred.
Yep.
Um, so, what eventually led you to actually run your own therapy practice now? Like, how did that
Well,
happen?
a few things happened. Um, I, I'd, I'd always had my practice called Melody Healing. I've had that for a while. And after I was coaching college football, I would do those on the side. And I had worked at an event or at another treatment center, and I came uh, acquainted with one of the psychotherapists there, Dr. Sid Young, and he has a practice here in St. George called Premier uh, Premier Health and Wellness, and he had asked me to be a part of it, and so I became and ran operations for him. It got of Premier Health and Wellness, and in that space, so a lot of things that just came and merge into one another, and along with me running my own, melody healing. Melody healing is uh, my process and my company, the Food of Love. So,
Excuse
and
me.
so we kind of merged that together with Premier Health and Wellness, and it's still functioning today. Premier Health and Wellness, and I do melody healing under Premier Health and Wellness and Food of Love.
Can you explain to us, however much is okay? Because I know there's a lot that, about therapy practices that it's a process with all your your clients and your patients. But can you explain whatever you're willing to explain about the melody healing? Because it's something you kind of invented, right?
Yes. So melody healing is it's a process that deals with trauma. My emphasis is on trauma, depression, and anxiety. And trauma, is most trauma patients they want to disassociate with events that happen. So everything that triggers those events, it affects them in different ways of where um, it almost stabilizes and affects their day-to-day movement of where it's difficult to interact with in relationships with others and in relationship with themselves. And so what melody healing does is try to help get people into a safe space using the mechanisms of music, such as space and time, as an example, uh, and amongst others, to help you feel safe and reassociate you with that part of your journey instead of trying to disassociate and looking at your things that happened to you as a tragedy, or defining that as your defining as your identity. And so melody healing helps you just look at that uh, as a journey. And if you can look at it as a journey musically, then it's just that, a journey, rather than a tragedy that happened to you and that made you who you are. And so, and there's layers to it that I help the patient achieve that goal.
It's really awesome. It's really awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, but again, something that you kind of developed yourself. And as a musician, you have a theater background, a musician background. I mean, I'm assuming that you were able to develop this partly because of your background as a musician, correct?
Yes, yes. And because of my own dealing of, of the story I just shared, those were dark days of where I had to survive through that. And so my survival was dependent on what I did with music that helped me get over the dark times, and then figuring out that, man, there's some beautiful things about this. Like looking at space and time is it's a very interesting observation. And I talked about this in my lectures a lot. If you look at a tiger that sits in a cage, that tiger is secure in the cage because of the bars, right? Well, that's partially true. The bars help the tiger stay secure in the cage, but it's the space between the bars, you know, that keeps the tiger in the cage. If you have a bar here and a bar right here, the tiger can just walk right through. But if you put the bars in its proper space, that's the critical part. But all we see are the bars. We don't realize that the space between the bars is what's most important in that dynamic. And so, as you dive into those understanding and learning what space, time, rest, and all those, what they mean, and it can be very beneficial in your journey.
Wow, that is really amazing. So, uh, just tell me, are you saying that, as far as therapy goes, like when you would use that analogy with the space between the bars, like in a tiger cage, are you emphasizing that like the space in between events, including traumatic events in someone's life, is like one of the most significant things, including like what makes someone eventually be secure and stable, like you say, that keeps a tiger stable?
Well, it's kind of like what I mean by space is it's like learning how to use space, right? Understanding space in the way that you think, the way that you talk, and the way that you interact. For instance, just in speech, right? If I were to come home and talk to my wife and I say, honey, you're the most beautiful thing in the world, looking at you is like looking at the ocean for the very first time. If anything happened to you, it make me crumble and die, right? I mean, those words are, if you see it on paper, it looks great. If you say it just like that, she might hit you with a pan in the forehead or something. But if you put the spaces in it, honey, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Looking at you, it's like looking at the ocean for the very first time. Anything were to happen to you, I would crumble and die, right? That's spacing, same words, right? The only difference is the spacing of the words and stuff like that. So, in a lot of times, as you go through your own issues of mental health, of where you're deciphering, you know, there's all these words and thoughts that are just a mesh in your head, just space it out, put some space in, and then use proper rest. I also teach a concept that's in music that's known as the rest note. I call it the rest note, but it's actually a symbol in music. It's a symbol that when you see it in a music sheet, it means silent, it means do nothing. And I emphasize on that note, because the space, just like the bars, space between the bars is what keeps the tiger safe in a cage. The space between the notes is what creates the melodies. And so, if you just look at the mesh of, that's in your speech and your thought process, and you're having a hard time trying to, get things right and straight, just learn proper spacing. And I can help you accomplish that, of where a thought process just becomes, when you space things out, then you can naturally see where the bars go to be in a safe place, where the notes go to create the perfect melody.
Man, that is amazing. That is really cool, Sam. I love that. Um, if you don't mind me asking, as we finish in the last little while here, do you have any interesting thoughts in general about, um, you know, Polynesians and mental health? Like, in your experience, do you have any observations that you've made about, do you feel like there's a stigma with Polynesians, like about wanting to be willing to see a mental health professional, or do you see any nuances, in general in our culture and our communities that make things harder or that, make things better as far as mental health is concerned?
Yes, I see a disturbing trend that's happening. Suicide, one of the highest causes of death in our Polynesian community, according to data that I saw from age 18 to 25, is suicide. And that's disturbing. And don't quote me on the exact data, but it's something around there. And I can, if you want to go do your research on and pull it up, it's close to those numbers. And, suicide was never an option growing up. That was never part of our escape. I've never heard of anybody, culture taking their own life when I was young, when I was a kid. And now it just becomes a normal thing. And it's normal meaning that I've heard of a few cases, even personal cases of family members that I've known. that taken that route. And as I look at that, therapy has never been a part of our normal interactions, and it's just starting to come to light. There's a lot of negative stigma that you know people carry in regards to therapy and stuff like that. And I think I've just talked to a Tongan therapist earlier today, and I'm excited to get to know this individual and what he's doing. And I'm going to be a part of their podcast in mental health and stuff like that. That's they're doing, and the more that we see people in that space, I see a lot of people that I work together with people that were, help domestic violence, trying to educate our women, trying to educate our men in how to deal, with mental health. And there's a lot of nonprofits out there that are doing things in our community that I support and I, you know, believe in, and that are doing this on a regular basis. And uh, so I look at that space with our Polynesian community, and it's very needed. And I think the more we educate one another on it, the more that our people can get help because they're suffering silently. Because there's this the cultural aspect of our existence, uh, and there's you know like we're speaking about Tongans, right? There's a Tongan culture, but there's also our Tongan American culture. But there's also our Tongan Utah culture that's different than our Tongan Bay Area culture and Tongan Texas culture. They're all different. And so, we need to find our commonality and understand that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say that I'm not okay. People don't fake depression. People fake being okay, you know. And so one of the common signs of people that have taken their own lives are that they look happy right before it happened, you know, because they're faking being okay. There's a lot of people walking around smiling that are dying inside.
Oh, that's a really important thing to point out. Again, sometimes it's the ones that look the happiest. You never know the turmoil they're dealing with inside, and
Yeah.
you never know. You gotta try to help, everyone we can to be able to be open to ask for help when it's needed and to know that it's okay.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah,
I wish I'd have had that understanding early on.
yeah,
A lot of times I put that smile on and just walked around, but inside is just, you know, crying.
yeah. It's amazing work you're doing. If from what you've heard, again, I know you said you heard the statistic that it's a high suicide rate from a certain age range among us Polynesians. Do you know, is that Polynesians globally, or is it mostly Polynesians in the States that are doing that from that statistic, or is it even Polys like in the islands like Tonga and other places, or do you know?
I'm not sure. I think it's just here in the States.
Yeah.
There's a lot of yeah, if you go and do research it out there, I mean, there's statistics here in the States, and I think Utah has this specific uh, data on it as well. And I'm happy to see there's a lot of more people here in Utah, our own people that are, I have a cousin of mine who just received her doctorate in as a psychiatrist here in Utah, and she's doing some amazing things. And I'm glad to see her, you know, go through this thing that I haven't heard any Tongans here in Utah achieve. And I'm starting to see more and more people get into it. So
Oh, that's really awesome. That's really good. It's oh, that's really good. I feel like the more Polynesians we have in the mental health field, there's a lot that we can bring to this mental health field because we know what it's like to sometimes not feel like it's okay to ask for help and all those kinds of things. So it's awesome to hear.
Oh yeah,
Um,
back in the islands, there were the dynamics of having a successful, happy life was very simple. You get up from sun up to sundown, you go work to get food for your family and food that's just enough for that day because there was no refrigeration. And so, you know, you would go work for food for that day. And then you come home and then you pray with your family and you laugh and you interact with your family with none of these devices that we have nowadays. And so uh, the problems were a lot different, a lot easier to address than they do now, where there's so many layers and so many dimensions to issues that it takes almost like, a crazy code to undo some of these things that we're maneuvering through. But it can be done, and we should just keep working at it and keep educating people and things like what you're doing right now is getting people into the space of just understanding there's help out there, you know. And so, one of the things that I really enjoyed when I was performing at Tuacon, and there's a family, Tongan family, they just happened to be on vacation, and um, they came to the show, and Tuacon is the Broadway in the Desert show here. It's a world-renowned stage here in St. George, and we were doing a meet and greet afterwards, and the son, who's looked like an athlete, and he came up and said, "Hey, I really want to do this." um, and I go, "Do what?" And I go, "I want to be in this space." And I go, "To perform?" He goes, "Yeah." I was like, "My passion is in performance." I go, "Well, go perform." He said, "Yeah, but everybody's looking at me to play football." And he had great size, and I was like, "Oh wow, this kid got the size, got you know." And so, but his passion was in performing, and our people are natural healers as well. And so, um, there's a lot more uh, people as you go in the Bay Area. A lot of people out there are seeking out Polynesian caretakers, Tongan caretakers, and for the elderly because of their compassion and the way they naturally adapt to the humanity in people and take care of them. And so we're have natural abilities and innate talent in this space as well to be healers. So,
it's amazing. It's amazing to hear. Just going off one of the things you said at the beginning, do you feel like overall, for the most part, mental health is naturally more healthy, like in Tonga, than it is in the States?
well, it's there's more issues here in the States, you know. Uh, like I said, there's so many layers here from technology to even the food we eat. And in Tonga, I remember growing up, uh, they were just, getting into processed foods coming into the islands, and it's starting to create a lot of problems in the islands, and mental health wise, one of the things that they uh, in Tonga that I understood as I was growing up is if anybody had a problem, you would go to your uh, pastor or your bishop or your, you know, clergy, people of faith, and you get help and ask for help in that regard, you know, and I would imagine that there are a lot more distractions now, so there have to be a lot more solutions, and and I hope that things. I haven't been there since I left, and I hope that, I understand that they have their struggles, but I hope we can just keep moving forward and understand that there's always a way. There's always a way out of whatever you're struggling with. There's always a way. There's always somebody willing to listen, and you're not the only one that's going through it.
Oh, that's so awesome to hear. It's really is a lot of nuanced, interesting things. You talk about the way even Tonga's evolving. But anything else to wrap up before we finish about any of your observations and your experience in therapy?
Oh, I'm just glad I get to be a part of what you're doing, and if I can help spread the word that you're not alone. That hey, all of us, we all need each other. We all need one another. We all need to stand together, and we can help. We can help one another. There is help that's available. There's a lot of places out there, and even like here in my own state, Utah, a lot of help out there that's available for us.
Oh, that's really awesome to hear. Thank you again, Sam, so much for coming on my show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in today. I'm Landon Sikahema, and again, this is my guest, Sam Lutui. Thanks again, Toko, for coming on.
Ofatu, malo.
Ofatu, bro. We'll see you later.
Yep.